Let's now look at illustration number 34. Lessee enters into a 10-year lease for 5,000 square meters of office space. The annual lease payments are 1 lakh payable at the end of each year. All right, so actually the facts are the same as what we had in illustration 36. It was a 10-year lease contract, 5,000 square meters of office space, and the consideration was 1 lakh per annum for 10 years. The interest rate implicit in lease cannot be readily determined. The lessee's incremental borrowing rate as at the date of commencement is 6% per annum. Now, till here, the facts are the same. Now, there is a change in the scenario. At the beginning of year 7, which means 6 years have passed by and we now have 4 years left. At the beginning of year 7, the lessee and the lessor agree to amend the original lease by extending the lease term by a period of 4 years. All right, so we had 4 years remaining. We are further extending it for a period of 4 years. So, therefore, the remaining lease term now is going to be 8 years. All right, we had a remaining lease term originally of 4 years. We are now further extending it by another period of 4 years. So the remaining lease term is going to be 8 years. All right, so total contractual term is going to be 10 years plus 4 years. It was 10 years plus 4 years, of which 6 years have passed by. So out of the total 14 years, 6 years have passed by, and we have a remaining lease term of 8 years. The annual lease payments are unchanged. They are 1 lakh payable at end of each year from year 7 to year 14. All right, we are extending the lease contract by a period of 4 years, but the amount that will be payable will continue to remain 1 lakh per annum from year 7 to year 14. The lessee's incremental borrowing rate at the beginning of year 7 is 7% per annum. The question is, how should the modification be accounted for in the books of lessee? Now, over here also, this is a case of modification because the lessor and the lessee are coming together and they are amending the original lease contract. Wherever lessee and the lessor are coming together and they are amending the original lease contract, that is going to be regarded as a modification. In the illustration 36 also that we did, the lessor and the lessee, they came together and they decided to change the consideration from 1 lakh to 95,000. Over here, they're deciding to keep the consideration constant, but they're actually increasing the term of the lease. They're increasing the term of lease from 10 years to 14 years, and therefore this is also going to be regarded as a case of modification. All right, let's actually now see how it is going to be accounted for. All right, we're going to follow the exactly same procedure. We first need the lease liability at the calculated at the inception of lease, calculated at the commencement of lease. What is the lease liability? We should actually then calculate what is the right of use asset and the lease liability amount at the beginning of year 7. We have to calculate what is the ROU asset and lease liability amount as per the books of accounts at the beginning of year 7, and then we will actually do the steps exactly that are same as illustration number 36. All right, so let's start solving illustration 34. All right, we start by calculating lease liability at year 0. All right, at the date of commencement, what is the lease liability? Lease liability at year 0. We have years as 1 to 10. Cash flow was equal to 1 lakh per annum. We had the present value factor given as 6%. All right, the question gave the discount rate to be 6% at the time of commencement of lease. So we have present value factor at 6%, and we then have discounted cash flow. All right, the present value factor at 6%, we actually calculated this value in the previous illustration as well. I'm just quickly taking it from there. So in illustration 36, we calculated the present value at 6% as 7.3601. All right, so we are going to have the same 7.3601 over here as well. So that would be discounted cash flow would be 7,36,010 rupees. All right, so the lease liability is going to be 7,36,010 rupees. All right, the journal entry is the same. ROU asset debit 7,36,010 and lease liability credit of 7,36,010 rupees. Let us calculate the carrying amount of ROU asset. The carrying amount of ROU asset at beginning of year 7. Beginning of year 7 is nothing but end of year 6. All right, so carrying amount of ROU asset at beginning of year 7 or end of year 6 is going to be equal to, we originally recognize an ROU asset of 7,36,010. We recognize an ROU asset of rupees 7,36,010. We have depreciation of 7,36,010. divided by 10 years. The depreciation per annum is 7,36,010 rupees divided by 10 years multiplied by 6 years. All right, we are multiplying it by 6 because 6 years have passed by. I want to calculate the carrying amount at the end of 6th year. So I am multiplying the depreciation per annum with the number of years that have passed by, and I am basically going to have an amount equal to 2,94,404. All right, the carrying amount of the ROU asset at the beginning of year 7 is 2,94,404 rupees. All right, this is the carrying amount at the beginning of year 7. Same way, I need to calculate the carrying amount of the lease liability at the beginning of year 7, for which I will actually have to prepare the lease liability schedule itself. All right, so let's start with the lease liability schedule. So we have years, we then have opening balance. We have interest which will be calculated at 6% because at this point, discount rate that we used was actually 6%. We then have payments, and then we finally have closing balance. All right. So now for year 1, the beginning balance will be 7,36,010 rupees. It's going to be 7,36,010. I calculate interest 7,36,010 multiplied by 6%, which is equal to 44,160.6 less payment of 1 lakh rupees. The payment is 1 lakh rupees, and I have a closing balance of 7,36,010 plus 44,160.6 less 1 lakh, which is going to be equal to 6,80,170.6. How did I calculate interest? Interest was calculated as 7,36,010 multiplied by 6%. Now, the numbers are going to be exactly the same as illustration number 36. Even if you have not seen illustration number 36, I'm sure that you will actually be able to plot down the lease liability schedule at your end. Therefore, what I would do is I would plot down the lease liability schedule until year 6, and then I will actually start the recording again. All right. So take a pause. You also prepare the lease liability schedule until the end of year 6, and then you can resume hearing it. All right. So the lease liability that we have at the end of year 6 in our books of accounts is 3,46,512.3. All right. I would have recognized interest each year at the rate of 6%, and I deduct the payments of 1 lakh from the lease liability, and I have 3,46,512.3 of lease liability at the end of year 6 in the books of accounts. End of year 6 is the same as beginning of year 7. All right. So the ROU asset that we had at the end of year 6, it was 2,94,404, and the lease liability that we have is 3,46,512.3. Now, at the beginning of year 7, we have a modification wherein the term is extended for a further period of 4 years. So, what I will do is, standing at the beginning of year 7, I will be calculating the present value of the future payments being 1 lakh for the remaining 8 years, discounted at today's discount rate, which is 7% per annum. All right, so I will calculate the revised lease liability as present value of 1 lakh rupees discounted at the revised discount rate of 7%, and this will be the revised lease liability. I will be comparing the revised lease liability with the liability that I have in the books of accounts, and accordingly I will make an adjustment to the ROU asset as well. All right, so now let's look at it. Let's calculate the revised lease liability. So revised lease liability at the beginning of year 7. We are calculating the revised lease liability at beginning of year 7. Now we have years from 1 to 8. Remember, why do I have 1 to 8? Because this basically represents year 7 to year 14 lease payments. We are standing at the beginning of year 7. So end of year 7 is 1 year away from where we are, and end of year 14 is 8 years away from where we are. So I have got 1 to 8 years. The cash flow continues to remain 1 lakh rupees. The cash flow continues to remain 1 lakh. We are now calculating the present value factor at 7%, and we then have discounted cash flow. All right, the present value annuity factor at 7% for a period of 8 years is going to be equal to 5.97 13. It's going to be 5.9713, and the discounted cash flow is going to be therefore equal to 5,97,130. All right, it's going to be 5,97,130. So this is going to be my revised lease liability at the beginning of year 7. All right, as a result of extension of the contract, my revised lease liability has been calculated as 5,97,130. In my books of accounts, I have got a lease liability of 3,46,512. I have a lease liability of 3,46,512. This time I got to increase my lease liability. I have to increase it from 346 to 597. Therefore, increase in lease liability is going to be equal to 5,97,130 less I have 3,46,512. 3,46,512.3. So I have got an increase in lease liability that I need to do of 597,130 less 346,512.3. That is going to be equal to rupees 2,50,617.7. All right. Therefore, I need to increase my lease liability by 2,50,617. Why am I actually supposed to increase? If you logically think of it, earlier I had a liability to pay 1 lakh rupees only for a period of 4 years. Now I have to pay additional 1 lakh rupees for a period of another 4 years. All right, because I've extended the contract, I have to now pay 1 lakh rupees for an additional period of 4 years. Therefore, my liability is bound to increase, right? Because I need to pay additional 1 lakh for 4 years, my liability is bound to increase, and the amount by which it is going to increase is 2,50,617.7. A corresponding adjustment will be given to ROU asset. All right. So we debit ROU asset by 2,50,617.7, and we credit lease liability by 2,50,617.7. All right. So lease liability increase basically refers to we credit the lease liability by 2,50,617. Correspondingly, we increase the ROU asset also by 2,50,617. ROU asset is also increasing because I now have the right to use that asset for an additional period of 4 years. Therefore, my value of that right is increasing. The right of use asset is increasing because I have the right to use this building for another 4 years, and therefore I'm now increasing that value of the right. All right. So the carrying amount of the lease liability after modification is going to be equal to exactly this value 597,130. The carrying amount of the lease liability after modification will be 5,97,130. All right. So what will happen is we have a lease liability currently in the books of 3,46,000. We add 2,50,000 to it, and therefore we have carrying amount of lease liability as 5,97,130. The carrying amount of ROU asset after modification, the carrying amount of ROU after modification will be equal to, we had an ROU asset of 2,94,404. At the end of year 6, we had 2,94,404. We had 2,94,404. We are now increasing it by 2,50,617. We are increasing it by 2,15,617. Therefore, the carrying amount of the ROU asset is going to be equal to 5,45,000 21.7. All right. So after modification, the right of use asset is going to have a carrying amount of 5,45,021.7 rupees. All right. So this is going to be the carrying amount of the lease liability at after modification at beginning of year 7. And similarly, we have ROU asset carrying amount at beginning of year 7 as 5,45,000. This will be depreciated over a period of 8 years. Now the remaining lease term is 8 years. So we have a depreciation per annum of 5,45,021.7 divided by 8. That's going to be equal to 68,127.7. All right. We will have a depreciation of 68,127.7, and we will actually have a lease liability schedule which we'll have to calculate separately, wherein interest is now going to be recognized at 7 percentage per annum. All right. Interest will actually be recognized at 7 percentage per annum, and we will have a lease liability schedule for a period of 8 years. We are going to have a lease liability schedule for a period of 8 years. Now, again, it's an optional one, but I would like to do it so as to show you the values. So let's actually do the lease liability schedule for the next 8 years. You can skip it in case you want to, because the question has actually not asked for it. So we have years. We have opening balance, and then we are going to have interest at 7%. We will have interest that will be calculated at 7%. We then have payments, and we'll have finally the closing balance. Let's be a little quick. So we are going to have years. First will be year 7. We made the modification at the beginning of year 7. Therefore, we are now plotting for year 7. The opening balance of lease liability is the carrying amount after modification, which is 5,97,130. All right, so it's 5,97,130 multiplied by 7% will be the interest. All right, I'm skipping the decimals. 41,799. I have payment which is equal to 1 lakh. Remember, we didn't modify the payment, so it's going to be payment of 1 lakh. The closing balance will be 597,130 plus 41,799 less 1 lakh rupees, which is 5,38,929. We then have year 8. So for year 8, the beginning balance will be 5,38,929. The beginning balance is going to be 5,38,929. I calculate interest at 7% on 538,929. So that is going to be equal to 37,725. It's 37,725. I have a payment of rupees 1 lakh, and I am going to have a closing lease liability of 4,76,654. All right, so it's 476,654. For year 9, I'm going to have 4,76,654 as the beginning balance multiplied by 7% to calculate the interest. The interest is basically going to be 33,366. I then reduce the lease payment of 1 lakh, and I have a closing balance of 476,654 plus 33,366 less 1 lakh, which is going to be equal to 4,10,020. All right, so for year 10, 4,10,020 is going to be my opening balance multiplied by 7% is going to be 28,701, which will be my interest, and I have got a payment that I will deduct of 1 lakh rupees, and that will give me a closing balance of 3,38,721. All right, I then have year 11, which starts with 3,38,721. I then have interest that I will calculate at the rate of 7%, which is equal to 23,710. I have a payment which I will deduct of 1 lakh rupees, and my closing balance will be 338,721 plus 23,710 less 1 lakh, which is going to be equal to 2,62,431. For year 12, remember the total number of periods will be year up to year 14. So we are going to have 12, 13 and 14. So I have a beginning balance of 2,62,431 multiplied by 7%, which is 18,370. I then deduct a payment of 1 lakh rupees, and my closing balance will be 2,62,431 plus 18,370 less 1 lakh, which is equal to 1,80,801. For year 13, I have 1,80,801 as the beginning balance multiplied by 7%, which is equal to 12,656. I then reduce my payments by 1 lakh rupees, and I have a closing balance of 180,801 plus 12,656 less 1 lakh, which is equal to 93,457. For year 14, I have 93,457 multiplied by 7%, which is 6,542. I have a payment of 1 lakh, and my closing balance should ideally be equal to 0. But if I calculate it manually, it will be 93,457 plus 6,542 less 1 lakh. I'm actually being left with a minus 1 rupee. So this I'm going to round it off to 6,543. I will be rounding it off to 6,543 so that the closing balance is actually equal to 0. So my year 14 interest will actually be 6,543, which is after considering the round off. All right. So at the end of 14th year, my lease liability goes down to 0. My ROU asset will also go down to 0 if I charge a depreciation of 68,127.7 for every year for the remaining 8 years. So in such a way that at the end of 14th year, it will actually go down to 0. All right. So at the end of 14th year or 8 years from today, 8 years from today, or at the end of 14th 15th year from the date of commencement of lease, both ROU asset and lease liability will actually go down to zero. All right. So with that, we are actually done with illustration number 34. All right. Thank you.